It was a typical Saturday night, or it was supposed to be, one of those obligatory social gatherings that you half look forward to, half dread. Emma and I were at a co-worker's party. Someone from her office, a marketing guy named Daniel who I'd met maybe once or twice. One of those dudes who wears turtlenecks like he's in a Netflix drama and insists his Spotify playlist is a vibe. The place was packed. String lights hung unevenly across the ceiling, casting a warm, soft glow that couldn't quite mask the feeling of forced laughter and too much perfume. People were drinking like they hadn't seen alcohol since college. Voices rising to compete with a playlist that was mostly The Weeknd, Lana Del Rey, and whatever synth-pop remix was trendy that week. Emma had been holding a glass of red when we walked in, already halfway drained by the time we made it through our first round of small talk. I watched her refill it from the kitchen island, swirling the wine like it was her date for the night. It wasn't like her to drink that much. She'd always been a one-glass-and-done kind of person, especially at work-related parties. But tonight, she poured herself a second, not even 20 minutes after the first. Then a third. At first, I told myself not to read into it. People drink more when they're trying to loosen up, when they've had a long week, when the company's not exactly thrilling. I try to chalk it up to that. But there was something else, a looseness in her posture, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear every time someone looked at her. She laughed too hard at someone's joke, touched a guy's arm as she passed him in the hallway. It wasn't anything I could call out without sounding paranoid, but it gnawed at me all the same. We eventually found a quieter corner near the back hallway, away from the buzz of the living room. The music was a little muffled there, the kind of space where people drifted to catch their breath or escape a boring conversation. Emma sat down beside me on a small two-seater couch, cradling her third glass of wine like it was a secret she wasn't ready to tell. Her body leaned into mine, head tipping toward my shoulder in that lazy, comfortable way that couples do. For a second, it felt normal. Familiar. Like maybe I was just being overly sensitive. She even laughed about something, some story from work, something about her manager getting caught wearing mismatched shoes. I smiled, nodded, tried to focus. Then she looked at me, eyes glassy but steady, and said, "I haven't really desired you in years." Just like that. At first, I thought I'd misheard her. I actually laughed, an awkward, confused little chuckle like I'd missed the punchline. What? I mean, she looked down at her glass, swirling the wine lazily, like physically. "I still love you, of course, but I haven't wanted you like that. For a while." Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. If anything, it was too casual, like she was commenting on the weather. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I sat up a little straighter. "Emma, what are you talking about?" She looked back at me, blinking slowly like I was the one who had said something strange. "It's not a big deal," she said. "It's just something I've been thinking about lately." I figured I should be honest. My heart thudded in my chest, loud and slow, like a war drum. I kept waiting for her to backtrack, to say she was joking or that the wine was talking. But she didn't. She sipped, smiled faintly, and said, "I think a lot of couples go through this. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. I just haven't felt that spark. Not for a long time." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The words caught in my throat, sitting there like stones. The room around us continued spinning on. People laughing too loudly, music pulsing through cheap speakers, someone knocking over a bottle in the kitchen and shouting party foul, as if the world hadn't just cracked open beside them. My mouth went dry. I looked at Emma, but it was like I didn't recognize her anymore. Her face, her voice, it all felt like a stranger's. She had said it so easily, so effortlessly, as if she hadn't just detonated our entire marriage with a single sentence. She leaned her head against my shoulder again, like nothing had happened, like we were still okay. And I sat there, frozen, staring blankly at the hallway across from us, my pulse in my ears, a glass of untouched beer sweating in my hand. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I could say. Any response felt either too big or too small. And maybe that was the worst part of it. How small I felt in that moment. How insignificant. The rest of the night blurred into static. I followed her through the motions, smiling at people I didn't care about, nodding at stories I didn't hear, helping her into her coat as we left. I don't even remember the drive home, Just the flicker of street lights and the sound of her humming along to the radio, like nothing had happened. But everything had changed, and deep down, I think she knew it too. The ride home was dead silent. Emma was scrolling through her phone, replying to someone's text with a soft smile playing on her lips, like nothing earth-shattering had just happened. I kept my eyes on the road, hands gripping the steering, while so tight it felt like my knuckles might split through the skin. I wasn't even sure if she remembered what she said. Or maybe she did, and it just didn't seem important enough to address. That was the part that messed with my head the most. If she had cried or backpedaled or tried to take it back, I think I could have clung to something, anger, maybe, or even pity. But the fact that she just moved on, that she didn't even seem to realize the weight of what she told me, that stayed with me, circling my thoughts like vultures. By the time we got home, it was past midnight. She headed straight to the bathroom to wash her face, humming as she went. I stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing, listening to the water run. There was a half-eaten slice of cake on the counter from earlier, still sitting on a paper plate. I threw it in the trash without thinking. When Emma finally came out, she looked at me with that sleepy, half-dazed look she gets when she's tipsy but functional. "Don't forget to lock the front door," she said, planting a quick kiss on my cheek like she hadn't just said she hadn't desired me in years. And then she went to bed. I didn't follow. Instead, I stood there in the living room for what felt like an hour, maybe more. The house was dim and too quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. I felt like I was standing in someone else's life, someone else's home. Her words played on a loop in my mind. "I haven't really desired you in years." It wasn't the kind of thing you miss here. It was clear, deliberate, even if softened by wine. And she hadn't taken it back. The weird part was that I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was stunned, like I'd been underwater for too long and only just remembered I needed to breathe. Everything around me felt distant, muffled, like I was watching myself from outside my own body. I finally went upstairs and slept in the guest room. Not because we'd fought. We hadn't. There weren't any shouting matches. No door slams or accusations. But something had shifted, something invisible but unmistakable. And I didn't want to lie next to her pretending it hadn't. The next morning, she acted like everything was normal. She was cheerful, maybe even more than usual. She made coffee, popped some bread in the toaster, and asked if I wanted eggs. I stared at her for a moment, waiting, hoping for some kind of acknowledgement. Something like, "Hey, about what I said last night." Nothing. Instead, she turned on the news and started talking about a new cafe that had opened downtown. I couldn't take it. I grabbed my coffee and sat outside on the porch, the winter air biting into my skin. I needed something cold, something sharp to wake me up from this fog. I sat there for a long time, fingers wrapped around the mug, trying to wrap my head around what the hell was happening. I kept thinking back over the past few months, trying to figure out if I'd missed something. The signs, the warning lights. Had I been so deep in autopilot that I didn't notice our marriage drifting into this weird, numb space? We didn't fight often. That was part of the problem. We just coasted. We did all the things married couples are supposed to do: laundry, bills, groceries, dinner with friends. But now I was starting to see the cracks I'd been ignoring. The lack of touch. The way she angled her body away from me when we watched movies. The way she started going to bed earlier, claiming she was tired, even when I knew she wasn't. I chalked it all up to stress, routine, the normal ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it had been eroding quietly, slowly, until the foundation just gave out. And the worst part, I couldn't even bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I was scared of what else she might say. What other truths might spill out once that door was opened. If "I haven't desired you in years" was just the beginning, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the rest. So I kept quiet. I played along. When she came outside a few minutes later and asked if I wanted to go to the farmer's market with her like we always did on Sundays, I said sure. I didn't say anything about the night before. I just nodded, finished my coffee, and tried to act like the man I had been 24 hours earlier. But something had cracked inside me, and I could already feel it spreading. The morning after the party felt like waking up inside a snow globe, quiet, contained, but just one shake away from chaos. Emma was already downstairs by the time I got up. The smell of coffee drifted through the house, and the radio was playing softly in the background, some upbeat acoustic song that made my skin crawl for reasons I couldn't explain. I moved slowly, deliberately, like every step needed to be measured, like I was walking through a crime scene that hadn't been cleaned up yet. When I reached the kitchen, she turned to me with a bright smile, already dressed in one of her casual Sunday outfits, leggings, a soft hoodie, hair in a loose braid. "Morning," she said, sliding a fresh cup of coffee across the counter toward me. "You slept in?" I nodded, mumbled something about needing rest. I didn't mention the hours I spent staring at the ceiling in the guest room, feeling like a stranger in my own house. I didn't mention the way her words had kept me up, echoing in my skull like a curse I couldn't shake. "I haven't really desired you in years." I kept waiting for her to bring it up, for even a flicker of recognition in her eyes that something had shifted, that she remembered. But there was nothing. No apology. No awkward tension. Just small talk and toast. She started talking about going grocery shopping later, asking if I still wanted salmon for dinner. I watched her move around the kitchen like nothing had happened, like the bomb she dropped the night before had somehow vanished in the morning light. It made my stomach twist. "You sleep okay?" she asked, not even looking up from the fridge. Yeah, I lied. I hated how easy the lie came, how natural it felt to play along. But I didn't know what else to do. If I confronted her, what was I even asking for? Clarification? An apology? Did I really want to hear her say it again? Sober, certain? I didn't have the stomach for it. Not yet. After breakfast, we went through the motions of our usual Sunday routine. We hit the farmer's market, browsed through produce we didn't need, made polite conversation with vendors. I watched Emma smile at people, laugh at little jokes, pick up bunches of kale like it mattered. And I stood beside her, nodding, pretending everything was fine while my insides churned. The weirdest part was how convincing we were. If someone had snapped a photo of us, her in her denim jacket, me with the canvas tote slung over my shoulder, we would have looked like the perfect couple. No one would have guessed I was dying inside. Back home, she went upstairs to fold laundry. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to scroll through my phone, but really just staring into space. My head was full of questions I couldn't answer. Had she fallen out of love with me? Was this a slow fade, or had something specific triggered it? Was there someone else? That last one I hated myself for thinking. I didn't want to go there. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid, insecure husband imagining affairs that didn't exist. But when someone tells you they haven't wanted you in years, what else are you supposed to think? I couldn't help but replay our recent history like some obsessive detective. The business trips, the quiet phone calls she always took in another room, the sudden push to go out with coworkers more without me. None of it seemed obvious at the time, but now it all felt like pieces of a puzzle I didn't even know I was putting together. In the afternoon, I sat on the back deck with a beer, even though it was still cold outside. I needed the sting of it, the way it snapped me out of my thoughts every few seconds. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that she was drunk, that people say stupid things when they're tipsy. But no matter how I spun it, her words still rang with clarity. She hadn't slurred them. She hadn't laughed them off. She meant it. That's what scared me the most. Later that evening, I found her in the bedroom, folding the last of the laundry. She looked up and smiled. "You okay?" she asked, like she actually cared. And for a second, I wanted to say it. I wanted to ask her what the hell she meant last night, wanted to hold her words up to the light and demand she look at them. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because if she told me the truth, if she looked me in the eye and said she hadn't wanted me in years with no remorse, I don't know what I would have done. So instead, I said, "Yeah, just tired." She nodded, satisfied with that. We crawled into bed that night, like we always did, backs turned, inches apart, not touching. She fell asleep quickly, her breathing steady and peaceful. I laid there staring at the ceiling, the sound of the house creaking around us like it knew something I didn't. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was alone, not just emotionally, not just in bed, but in this marriage. And maybe I've been for a long time. I wish I could say the realization came all at once, like some light bulb moment where everything clicked and I suddenly knew what I had to do. But it didn't happen like that. It came in pieces, little ones, quiet ones, moments so subtle that I almost missed them, like the way Emma didn't notice when I stopped putting sugar in my coffee, or how she didn't ask where I'd been when I stayed out later than usual that Wednesday night. She just said, "Hey," when I walked in like I'd been gone for 5 minutes instead of 3 hours. She used to care, or at least she used to pretend to. That's when it hit me. How long it had been since we'd truly seen each other. I started thinking about all the times I'd brushed aside my own needs to keep the peace. The trips I didn't take because she didn't want me gone too long. The job offers I turned down because she didn't want to move. The way I used to write her little notes in the mornings until I noticed she stopped reading them. So I stopped writing them. She never said a word. And it wasn't just her. I had let it happen. I let myself fade out of my own life. I became the guy who picked up groceries, made sure the bills were paid, scheduled her dentist appointments. I became useful, efficient, predictable, but not seen, not wanted. It's hard to explain the kind of ache that comes from being invisible to the person you love. It's like shouting underwater, full of effort but no sound. One night, I caught myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, just staring. I didn't recognize the man looking back at me. He looked tired. Not just the kind of tired sleep could fix, but something deeper, something like a slow bleed. What scared me wasn't just that Emma didn't desire me anymore. It was that I couldn't remember the last time I desired anything. Joy, spontaneity, passion. It had all been stripped away, replaced by routine and resignation. And I'd let it happen. I told myself that marriage was work, that love wasn't always fireworks, that comfort mattered more than chemistry. But what is comfort without connection? We used to talk about everything, silly things, deep things, hypothetical what-if conversations that lasted past midnight. Now, we talked about groceries, deadlines, dinner. We hadn't really kissed, in I don't even know how long. We hadn't touched in weeks, maybe months, and it didn't even feel strange anymore. That scared me too. One afternoon, I was walking home from grabbing lunch, and I passed this couple on the sidewalk. Maybe late 20s, probably new in their relationship. They were holding hands, laughing at something only they understood. I felt this weird, unexpected lump rise in my throat. Not because I missed Emma in that way, but because I missed me. The version of me that used to be capable of that kind of joy, that kind of lightness. That was my moment of clarity. This wasn't just about Emma. This was about the person I had become while trying to keep a relationship alive that had quietly died somewhere along the way. I had been telling myself it was enough. Her presence, her companionship, the shared history. I convinced myself that a quiet, distant version of love was still love. But it wasn't. It was something else. Something colder. And now that I'd seen it for what it was, I couldn't unsee it. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed while Emma brushed her teeth, and I looked around the room. Our wedding photo still hung on the wall across from the bed. The smiles in that picture didn't even feel like ours anymore. They felt like characters we used to play. Emma came out of the bathroom, toweling off her hands, and asked if I'd remembered to call the plumber about the leaky faucet. And I said, yeah, like everything was fine. But inside, something had shifted. Not in a dramatic, burning the house down kind of way. More like a quiet click, a door unlocking. I knew I couldn't keep doing this. I didn't know what the next step would be yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, whatever we had become, I couldn't pretend it was love anymore. I think the scariest thing about realizing your marriage is a lie is how normal everything still looks on the outside. Emma and I had become experts at pretending. We still showed up to dinner parties and smiled in photos. We still texted each other reminders about vet appointments and oil changes. We still said, love you, at the end of phone calls like a reflex, like muscle memory. And yet, every bit of it felt hollow. It was like watching a movie I'd already seen 100 times. I knew every line before it was spoken, every beat before it hit. There was no suspense, no emotion, just performance. Two people acting out the roles they'd been cast in years ago, too afraid or too tired to admit the script didn't fit anymore. At some point, I stopped talking in the we language. I started saying I when I told stories. I went to the store. I had a weird meeting at work. I might go for a run tomorrow. It wasn't on purpose. It just started happening. And Emma didn't correct me. She didn't even seem to notice. That told me everything I needed to know. I'd look at her sometimes, across the dinner table or curled up on the couch with her book, and try to remember what it felt like to be in love with her. Not just fond of her, not just committed to her, but in love. And I couldn't. That was the hardest part, because I knew once I had been, fully, completely, the kind of love that rewired your insides, the kind that made mundane things feel special. Grocery runs, inside jokes, the way she used to steal the covers and laugh when I protested. But all of that had faded, slowly, quietly, until one day I woke up and realized we were just roommates with a shared lease and matching bath towels. People always say marriage is hard work. They say you have to keep choosing each other every day. And maybe that's true. But what no one warns you about is what happens when one of you stops choosing. When the work becomes one-sided. When the choosing turns into tolerating, enduring, surviving. That's what our marriage had become. A long stretch of survival. I kept thinking back to that night at the party when Emma said those words to me. I haven't desired you in years. I realized it wasn't just a careless confession. It was a symptom, a flare from something much deeper and older and more broken than either of us wanted to admit. And I hadn't just been ignoring the signs. I had been helping cover them up. I kept up the image, the couple that had it all, the stable marriage, the loving partnership. Even as the foundation cracked beneath us, I kept sweeping the dust under the rug, smiling for the camera, pouring her coffee in the morning like it still meant something. We were so good at pretending that we started believing it ourselves, at least for a while. But once I stopped believing, the illusion shattered. One night, Emma fell asleep on the couch while watching a show we'd started together, but that I'd checked out of weeks ago. I stood in the hallway for a long time, just watching her. Not in some sentimental, nostalgic way, just trying to see her clearly. And what I saw wasn't my wife. It was someone I once loved. Someone I'd grown apart from, little by little, moment by moment, in 1,000 ways too small to notice until they added up to something permanent. She looked peaceful, lying there under the throw blanket, her face soft in the glow of the TV. And for a second, I didn't feel anger, or even sadness. I felt release. Not because I didn't care anymore, but because I finally understood that caring wasn't the same as staying. We had both built this life like a house made of glass. It looked beautiful from the outside, but it couldn't survive any real pressure. And now, it had fractured, quietly, invisibly, and I was done trying to tape the cracks. I walked back upstairs, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at our wedding photo again. The smiles in that picture still looked real. But I knew now, they were part of the illusion too.